Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
So this is our first 2024 podcast. I'm actually with my guest, Sarah Deverell, who I've worked with for a number of years now, first of all. But for those that haven't had the luxury of working with you, would you like to say who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sarah. I am an HR professional, I guess, through and through from the beginning of my career. I know Sam more from the last 4 years where I've been supporting Qual Therapeutics initially as their head of people and then moving to Enara more recently as head of people. So we have lots of contact talking about bringing great people into the business.
We certainly do. And it's quite a journey to be able to do that, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it definitely is one that has highs and lows sometimes, but I think we always get there and we always end up with some really, really fantastic colleagues. So I'm very grateful to the team at Northreach for all of your help with that.
Thank you. I think that's why I wanted to invite you to this one, because they've really asked about doing a whole topic on HR trends and the future of it. And like we were talking about before, right? A lot of it is just your own experiences that you're going through and then what that could look like in the future. Because I have obviously worked with you sometime, but I did a little bit of background on you as well, obviously, because you've actually worked in HR particularly for quite some time now.
Yeah, I was always, from my first role outside of university, I went straight into HR. I love the mix of people as well as actually really supporting businesses and moving through growth. And I've been fortunate to be in some very small businesses recently more so, and also some much larger kind of corporate businesses. So it's interesting to see the mix and the different dynamics there and actually how you can approach things in different ways, obviously at those different size points.
Definitely. And tell us about your degree, because you've got quite an interesting one as well.
I do, yeah. So I studied Japanese and business studies. So I spent a year out in Japan.
That's amazing.
As well. So doing an intercalary year, and I spent some time at university there and also did some internships. So I worked in steel manufacturers. I worked at a local council in Japan. Wow. So I am somewhere on some intro videos, somewhere deep in the internet, I hope, now firmly buried. But yeah, there is me guiding you around the Soka Council City Prefecture offices.
No way.
Yeah.
So you just fluent in Japanese as well then?
Fluent would be quite a stretch. I'd say conversational at a push these days. I usually need quite a large drink to go with it for a bit of confidence because I just don't use it as much as I would like.
Not that anyone would know if they didn't speak Japanese anyway, though.
No, that's true. You can probably wing it for a while, but anyone Japanese would be looking at me just like, what on earth? So yeah, I'm really lucky. I've still got some friends in Tokyo. I've still got some friends who live and work there as well from my degree. Yeah. So yeah, there's always a connection.
That's fantastic. So you've actually worked here in the UK, you've worked in Japan, but in America as well.
Yeah, so I worked, I actually lived in Canada and then worked across sites. So at one of my previous employers, I was HR business partner for North America. So I had the Canadian site as well as some of our Atlanta kind of based teams and groups there, which was great. So I got the dichotomy of the US and Canada, which is the very, really different environments actually. And then Brussels as well. I spent some time living and working in Brussels too.
So what's that like then? So seeing things from America, Europe, Japan, it must have been lots of different people, different cultures, different ways of doing things.
Massively. I think it gives you, a really good perspective on one size does not fit all, actually as you work through and you just look at different geographies as well as just, different cultural groups coming together. I think you always have to be a little bit reflective and thoughtful around the fact that what might work in one situation doesn't necessarily work in others. And more than that, I think there's also an element of respecting and also always acknowledging, right, the different environments that you're trying to work within. And we looked a number of global projects, I guess, within my role in the bigger corporate that I worked in. And I think having had the experience of actually being able to live and work in those locations gave me a lot better viewpoint as to what would work well and what would be just an absolute disaster. So I think that was really nice. And I think I like to think I take that with me in terms of recognizing.
So you got to see some good, bad, indifferent and everything in between.
Yeah, I'd like to think there's been a a good variety of initiatives that I've seen absolutely land on their faces, and ones that I've seen really, change people's lives at work and fundamentally then outside of work for the better. So I think there's so much you can do with, working in HR and actually, making that difference. But equally, you see things that just don't work, and sometimes you can unpick those reasons quite carefully as well.
Definitely. So how has it changed? Like, how have you seen it change from when you was at university up until more recently? Has there been dramatic changes that you've seen, or?
I think so. I mean, without disclosing my age too much, I reference how old I'm getting quite often, but I do think actually from leaving university and really being in corporate environments and seeing, frankly, even in my first role, we were still talking about personnel departments, which for me now feels absolutely archaic.
Yeah.
But it wasn't,
Then.
It was very much that was what you were called, the personnel department. And I think everything felt really separate. There was very much people's, work selves, people's home selves.
That's it, yeah.
And there wasn't really a lot of bleed in between, and nor was that bleed encouraged. And I think when we think about authenticity and all of the things that I think make a workplace today, and the things that, people credit as being massive, I think anyway, I guess wins for their workplace and how they feel about coming to work, that wasn't there. It was very much, you show up as we want you to show up, and this is what we're paying you to do, and this is your contract. And in some ways it's very clear, so you can't really knock it from a clarity perspective. But I think if you're really thinking about human beings, the workplaces that I joined, I don't believe were centered around a human workforce. They were centered around really, like I said, that personnel approach and that human resources, really being able to kind of pick and pull and move people around, and really seeing people as just parts of a puzzle rather than people. And I think we are moving, I'd like to think, hugely towards actually respecting that people come as fully fledged human beings and not just resources for an organization.
That's quite funny. I forget that that's what it would have been called. And then we've seen different iterations since then, haven't we? And even HR doesn't seem to be as sticky as it used to be.
No, I think it has moved on, and I think people recognize it. And I think, a term is a term. You never really want to get to a point where you can't say certain words, or you can't sort of call anything HR. But equally, my role title now is head of people, and I like it because I think it recognizes, again, right, that we're multifaceted. We're people coming to work. We're not just the company's resources turning up at 9 a.m, leaving at 5:30, and suddenly we become not the company's resource. That's that's not a nice concept when you really kind of get to the bones of it.
Yeah, you hit like a nerve when you said earlier about you just come to work, right? You leave your personal bit at home, and then you turn on when I need you to at the door. And I remember that vividly, being 20 something years old, going to London, working, and I remember my boss used to say to me, whatever's going on at home, just leave it at the door, just leave it there, and then I need you just on. And that's what you did. That's what you was told. Like, that was just a normal thing. But then you kind of speed forward to now, and all of a sudden that whole concept seems to have really dissipated and always is now disencouraged. Now it's more about bringing your whole self to work, right?
Yeah.
I think that is just quite an interesting change.
I think it's a massive dynamic shift in not a huge period of time.
Yeah.
When you think actually probably that concept had been there for years and years and years before that. Yeah. It's not, I don't think in the 20 years prior to that hugely shifted.
Really different, no.
So I think for me, it's, I know we've been through a massive technological revolution, but I think we have been through quite a revolution in the way that we think about how people come to work, how people approach work, and also motivation for being at work. There's so much more, I think, research that's accessible and actually really, for me as well, absorbed by multiple people, right? I think the joy of things like podcasts, right? And just even being able to listen to multiple kind of journals, etc., in a really accessible way now means that we're not all kind of compartmentalizing some of those studies on work. I think we're bringing them in, and I think they're having more impact. And there's great researchers out there. There's a lot that you can read, but I think from just a base level perspective, it doesn't feel quite so untouchable.
Definitely. And technology's had a profound effect on that, hasn't it? Yeah. I still think that COVID has a lot to answer for in one respect, but that's, in my opinion, seemed to have just expedited this whole idea of well-being and how you attract talent, how you retain it, how you encourage them to do their best work. And has that had a part to play? Like, I know we've seen it because we've worked through it, right? Trying to attract the right people, but it's almost candidates and people in general are so much more aware, because you're probably right. The information that's accessible now to say, well, actually, that's not normal. I should be kind of looking to fill my whole self coming to work. I shouldn't have to be half a person. I think that's been such a huge change. So I'm quite curious, I suppose, to think, okay, so that happened. We're going through this kind of change. Employers are a lot more savvy to looking at people's mental well-being, their physical, to help better perform. But where the hell do you start with that? Because that was almost just thrown on us, right? So you've got that job, and they all look at you and go, right, we've got to do the best work. We need to encourage people. Then we need to look after them all. Sarah, how do we do it? Like, where do you start?
Yeah, where are the magic bullets?
Yeah, where's the bullets? Where are they?
I think for me, it's really hard, isn't it? I think, every organization has different resources to really put into that as well. I think the good thing about COVID is that actually it forced some resources in that direction where maybe they weren't across all businesses quite as prevalent. Yep. So I think for me, one of the luxuries of COVID was that actually it was that acknowledgement of we're dealing with a whole person, and that whole person is looking at potentially, really different situations at home. We had people who were caring for little ones who were then at home 24/7, and the stress that brings. We had people who were on their own 24/7, and actually the burden that plays for them. Yeah. And then we had others who, couldn't get to their families because they weren't located in the same country. And suddenly actually that distance felt absolutely enormous. Yeah. Whereas before it was, yes, you were remote from your family, but you could get to them. And suddenly that optionality was gone. And, there were, far more situations than that. But I do think suddenly you are being forced to open your eyes and realize all of these individuals are working for us and are doing great work and doing their best. We need to support them in any way that we can. Yeah. And it does start from different places. I think it just depends what resources you've got. I think anything you can do to support people's mental health and well-being, give resources. I think also just making sure people know they're not alone, right, in those circumstances. But for me, the ironic part of that probably is that that's true in any case, right? When you go back to basic human psychology, we like to feel that we belong, right? That community sense is actually massive for us. So regardless of COVID, actually putting some resource there and actually putting thought around how do you create that community feeling and that feeling of belonging in a world where people are more transient with roles, where people do move around, and, for good reason, right? So that their skills, their capabilities are recognized. And I always think that's a massively positive thing that the world shifted. So, the job for life piece doesn't feel like a burden for people. You can move around. You can, you can go where you feel that you're valued. You feel that actually you do have the right work-life balance. You have all these choices, and that is a wonderful thing. But I think what it can sometimes cause is that lack of feeling of belonging, where you are moving, and we need to, as businesses, but I think more than that, just as communities in organizations, think about what are the things that we can do to support people with that. How can we create those communities and that feeling of belonging as quickly as possible? Because actually that settles us, and just a base, human level, to feel that we belong, to feel that we know where we are, we feel that we have the goalposts, It goes a really long way, but I think that is harder to do when you're trying to expedite those things every time. Yeah. And you might have someone who's, joining you, who's been in 5 different organizations, 6 different organizations. How do you do those things so that they feel settled, and also that they're not just feeling that things are being regurgitated? How do you have an identity in your organization?
And be unique with that.
Exactly. That feels like it, welcomes you, embraces you too.
So the well-being piece probably was the first place to start in some degree, right? And that's been huge, isn't it? So we've kind of gone from that, leave it at the door, to now bring it in. And I suppose that has kind of changed the dynamic of the way we deal with people. And I've seen it now that we kind of talk about it as more human-centric organizations and thinking about how we can empower these people. But like you said, it can't just be a tick box exercise, can it? You can't just go, well, we have these programs and we've done our bit. No. Now go perform. Now go work.
Because people know that, right? You know, you put a training on for an hour, you stick a Zoom call about mental health and well-being. But if that's not lived and people don't feel that, you know, from their direct team through to your leadership team, then actually I think there's a lot that can go missing. And I think it feels insincere, but at worst, it just feels that it's actually fairly baseless. So I think it is really important that whatever you're doing, and I think you can't, to your point, right, you can't do everything all at once unless, you know, someone's giving you unlimited resources. You are not. And when we think about trends, there's so many, right? There's so many things you could be doing at any one point as an HR team. And I don't think that's different, right? In any department or industry, right? You're going to have all of these options. So I think it is about trying to understand the trends, but also lean into the things that feel that they actually mean something at your organization. And that's, you know, takes a bit of work, I think, to get there and to understand that, and also to work with leadership teams. And also, you know, beyond that, right? Just your colleagues day to day to really think about what would make a difference. Because if you're doing things that kind of don't move the needle much, it's great, but is it expediting that belonging? Is it really kind of speaking to who you are?
So in a way, in your position, we know this, right? Because you've seen it, but by the way you say it, it's not actually your job to do it, is it? You're part of it, but it's everyone, surely. And how do you get everyone on that journey then? And because I've always thought about that and going, even here, and the only way I've ever known it is just to lead it from above. Because you, like you said, even if you had all the resources in the world and you just paid for it, you still got to believe in it yourself, right? And I've always seen it where you grow companies and you go into different places. Culture is not just one culture. It's built up of lots of different cultures, but ultimately it's led by your superior, which I find absolutely bizarre. So you could have one person up here say, this is our culture, and another person, completely different part of the organization, says the same things, but it means a completely different thing, or they just don't do it.
And I think, look, for me, I think it's a bit of a mix. Fundamentally, I'm in the luxurious position, I should say, of being in a really small business. So I think we know a lot more about everybody.
Yep.
So I don't feel like actually this has to be an LT exercise. I think if we can clearly see things and there's clearly, for me, a need in the business and people are sharing it and people are really great at proactively sharing, then we can do something. So I don't think it always has to come from a top down, but I think what you want is people who are willing to hear it and listen and act on it, and also chuck some resource our way sometimes, depending on what it is, right? So I think for me, I think it's when it's only top down, I think you lose a bit of energy behind it, but also then you're probably not following the trends, right? Fundamentally, I think that by the time it's got to the point where someone potentially in your leadership team is spending the time to think about it, it doesn't mean that wave is gone, but it probably means that it's not something that's top of everyone else's mind in that way. So you want to kind of try and act on it before it already is then in an LT sort of situation, or leadership team, sorry, I should say, where they're hearing a lot of the noise around it, because you think, well, actually, there were probably some signals that could have been picked up through the business. But I think that's easy to say when you've got 60 people in your business. I think it's harder when you're looking at a team, as I have in the past, of, you know, thousands of individuals. That's when I think actually you have different technologies and different ways to utilize and really try and gather some feedback, gather some trends, and figure out, you know, what are your team members working situations, what are their home situations, what are your average ages in your team, what are things that you can pick up as consistent narratives that might help you shape that and really think about, well, what are the future steps you could take? So I think there's different ways of applying it, but I think it's great when it comes consistently, like you said, from a leadership perspective, that it's consistent, it's clear, but I think it has meaning as well when it can be pushed through the people that are working in your organization. I think if you leave it all to leadership to always set the tone, then like I said, I think you just lose a little bit of energy and the direction feels always different. It doesn't feel owned in the same way.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point there, because like you say, you can set that whole piece up and go, well, that's it, like just follow this. But I suppose, again, there's probably lots of different groups of people within that, and it probably is easier when it's a smaller organization because you can pick it up a lot faster. But as you scale that, or you're working for a big company, by the time you set that in, because there's always red tape to change, it's probably too late and the trend's gone and it's actually not really a thing anymore. And I think we've definitely seen that even on the agency side, where there's organizations that got so late to the party with work life, a hybrid working.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, but we have hybrid working. It's like, yeah, so did we 3 years ago. Like, you're way late.
Yeah,
it's
and you're selling
gone.
it, right, as a benefit.
Yeah.
And that, as you said, it's a good thing. It's a positive thing, but you're not changing anything.
You're just
really. You're just, as you said, making sure that actually you're not in a retention crisis because of it. You weren't proactively looking at that, and that's the difference, I think, in terms of the energy.
Definitely. So where's it all going? That's the question, isn't it? So we're talking for the trends for the next, well, it will be January by the time this podcast goes out, but for the future. So we've seen personnel, HR, and different ways of kind of doing things and what COVID's kind of done, but where do you kind of see it going forward? What about well-being? Let's take that first of all. How's that going to change, do you think?
I think well-being, from a UK perspective, although I think some of this is true globally, there isn't any one healthcare system that is absolutely fit for purpose. And I think that there's a lot around well-being that actually will focus not maybe on some of the luxuries like we have probably a little bit more in the past, but actually in just keeping people in the best state with regard to accessing healthcare, accessing, supplemental services, probably more holistic therapies and treatments, because I think actually that's far more understood as a benefit now. But I actually don't see, for me anyway, sadly, that well-being is taking like a huge shift forwards, because I think actually what the focus will be on in 2024 is plugging the gaps where we see them just on a basic services level, and making sure that our team members aren't compromised by that, and that actually they still have everything that they need at their fingertips. Yeah,
I think you're right, because I like the holistic thing, because I've always thought you could go down a mental well-being package at work through a GP, you get referred, you take that process, and ultimately it ends up with a physical of some description, and then maybe a referral to a therapist. And then you have X amount of sessions that you'll kind of go through, which is great. It's quite heavy, and you have to go through that process to get it. And sometimes actually it's more lighter things that you're kind of just dealing with. And sometimes I definitely find it's just that one thing that tips you over the edge. It's like, I don't need a full-on therapy session. Like, I just need to know how to deal with my just everyday life. And I think there's been a big shift with that. And I suppose in the UK, like you say, particularly where our cost of living has gone skyrocketed, salaries probably haven't kept up for the whole spectrum of that. We've seen it with doctors, haven't we, and school, like teachers that go on strike and whatnot because they're not feeling that they're able to do their jobs at the best capacity because they're not getting paid. But at the bottom of that, they still love what they do. It's just that all these little things are just building up. So I think, you probably hit something there to think that actually it's probably more the basic things that we've kind of just missed.
Yeah, and it's sad to say, right? You'd love to be talking about trends that feel a little bit more, in my mind anyway, innovative or forward thinking. But actually, when it comes down to it,
Keep it basic.
Yeah, well, you want your teams to have access to the things they need.
Yeah.
And I think when the basic system of care doesn't necessarily support that, then we have to make sure that actually that's something that can be looked at as an organisation.
Yeah. Great. So that's well-being. You mentioned technology. Technology is obviously a huge thing that has been a huge revolution, definitely in our lifetimes. I remember when first starting to work, things like LinkedIn were just coming in, and that access to things, and you had text message, and that was about it. But now there's a million different ways to communicate, and that's through, from work perspective, it could be Zoom or Skype or Teams, whatever it may be. And put in the hybrid working, put in remote workers and the rest of it, we're not rooms full of people anymore. We're everywhere. But how do you keep that togetherness, that connectivity through like a million different types of media now? Like that to me seems to be like a real one.
Yeah, I think it's a massive challenge, right, for businesses as a whole. And I don't think that's limited to HR. No. Fundamentally. I think that is a business-wide challenge in thinking about how do we, and again, it comes back to that belonging, right? How do you still feel like you're in the room, even if you're not physically in the room? And how do you engage with your workspace when maybe you're not in your workspace, but actually how can we bring the workspace to you in a way that works and it helps you manage your life, but also keeps you connected to what's happening with all of your colleagues?
Yeah.
So I think there's a huge shift towards really thinking about, well, obviously with hybrid working, you can argue the toss really on actually you get the best of both worlds, but there's still days, right, where those individuals are not physically there. So I think there's a lot that is happening to make sure that those technologies are utilised effectively so that, and I think we learned through COVID, right, the back-to-back meetings, the, absolute, everyone must be green on Teams kind of mentality, and that presenteeism online actually became more, I think, constraining to people than just being in the office was, because it would be like, well, you can see me. But, suddenly online, there was that feeling of like, I must be here. I must send my manager a message. I must. And that you want to avoid that. Effectively, you want to kind of have that trust that just, flows through. And I think we're there for the most part, but I think you want technologies that enable that. But again, don't confuse the situation, because I think you can add so many things in. And I think that there's a myriad of technologies you can use. Obviously there's Teams messages, Slack, there's, Zoom, you can chat via Zoom, you can, so
WhatsApp.
Exactly. WhatsApp. Yeah. There's a million different ways, right, we can stay connected. And I think it's also making sure that that doesn't then intrude with someone's ability to actually just get their work done too. And that the communication is still given a focus, but it doesn't become really, I think for me anyway, that mismanagement between when you're on site, that you can have those conversations, and then when you're off site, suddenly, actually your Slack becomes the most important thing to manage.
Yeah.
It's just trying to get that balance right. And I think for 2024 and beyond, I think there'll be even more focus on just thinking about actually what does that work situation look like when individuals are working across the globe, right? Because I think, we sometimes think about work or home, but there's a huge population of workers who are working essentially like digital nomads, right? Yeah. They're not even necessarily in their homes. They are just in different workspaces or different living spaces and logging in. And that's an incredible benefit. And you want to be able to utilize that as much as possible and put that in people's hands. But then you need to know actually, well, then how do you still create that shape of belonging? How do you still avoid that online presenteeism pushing through and making that actually quite a miserable experience for some?
Because it does become that, doesn't it? And you can be fully consumed by that. And I remember when we was working together before quite closely, and there were times where it was just relentless. And you did it. You just kind of just got on with it. But during that time, it was just, well, I just have all these meetings. Everything's important. I've just got to get through it. And I think as time's kind of gone on, like everything, you kind of start looking at it thinking, this isn't sane. This is not like sustainable.
Yeah. Ultimately. And I think with COVID, we all had that somewhat short-term mentality of we're all in the same boat. We're just going to row. We'll just do it. So I don't think there was that sit back and focus on how are we adopting these technologies in a smart way? How are we, protecting people's mental health in the way that we're looking at this? I don't think those considerations were there. So I think what's kind of happening now is a hangover of trying to correct some of those wrongs. And again, I think that is a really positive thing, but there are some behaviors, obviously, that grew in that environment that weren't really as conducive as others, I don't think, to really putting people in optimum states.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a massive thing. And I think just on a personal level, you do need to really think about actually who is the human, right, at the end of all of this. It's great that you've got like 10 ways of getting in touch with somebody.
Oh my God,
but actually, how does that benefit your business? And also, how does that benefit that person who's then managing those 10 different technologies and responding in that way?
I don't like it. I literally, when I look at my phone, you got WhatsApp text messages, phone, Slack, Teams, Zoom, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Facebook Messenger. It's like 10 there. And literally my phone would go, bim, 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 all these different things. I think, oh my God, I want to go back to what it was, just a text message. And I've got 10 of them for 50p, so it has to be important.
But I have those, but then we have to remember, right, that there's a whole workforce who never lived without this.
Of course, yeah.
Right, and who have always had all of these technologies at their fingertips, so none of this feels as intrusive. But equally, we also know that the generations who have come kind of after technological kind of booms actually do suffer from burnout more, do suffer from, sadly, comparisonitis more, do suffer from actually, how do I take a break? And, actually people having to talk about like digital downtime. They weren't conversations, right, that were natural 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And this is all now in our language, but how are we really using them in a workplace? And I don't think that we have completely tied together. So I think for technology, as we move forward, some of those things will come into play. But then there's loads of exciting stuff as well, right?
You've been looking at some new bits, right?
Yeah, we're looking at, new HRIS and we are looking at just how we use our platforms, how we, how everything integrates, how everything talks to each other.
The integration piece is huge now, isn't it?
But honestly, in bigger business environments, some of the technologies that are already being utilized and, data storytelling, all you need to do is look at ChatGPT, right? You can you can do incredible stuff, but then it's just thinking about how do you utilize that to really bring insights to your business? And a lot of it comes down to actually what data are you putting in to start with. So I think one of the trends is that there still has to be a huge focus on what data are you collecting, why, what does that look like, what insights do you need? And actually, how do you want that to be reflected back? Because there is a technology that can do all of it, but you have to get the setup right. You have to actually be considering it in the right ways. So that for me is a massive thing for 2024 and beyond. But it's so exciting. And I think, in HR, it's difficult because we're so people oriented. So I think you never want to lean fully into full automation of everything, right? Because it misses the nuance. It misses, as wonderful as some of these technologies are, there is, again, right, that recognition. There's a person at the end of all these interactions, and you want that to be right for them. That's a massive thing. But equally, it just opens up, right, so many opportunities. And I think we are maybe a little bit late to the party on some things just because of that like real desire to keep things human. And I think it's the right thing. It's the right pushback. But it's exciting as well to be able to see, but what can we do? Like, what can we unleash? And actually, how can we work with, even organizations like yours, right? How can we build those insights? How can we work smarter, better? How can we find those people who we know would be wonderful in our business? How can we do that in a way that we outreach straight to them? That's all of those opportunities are massive. And I cannot even imagine the bounds of technologies in the next 10 years. But even in the immediate year, some of the things that you can explore, I think, are really exciting.
They are. They really are. And I like where that direction is going because everything is more accessible. But like you say, it's more about, it's wonderful to have all this data or database, all these people, but how do you manage through that? How do you manage through that? because that in itself is mind-boggling.
And also, how do you manage the reality that a lot of things can now be automated, and actually there's technology that can do it better, faster, quicker. What does that look like in a workforce, right? Realistically, that's part of my job. And, you know, if you look 10 years into the future, what roles, I mean, you know, very seriously, what roles do we see as still having real advantage over just the pure technologies? Where, you know, where are we bringing, as I said, that nuance, where are you bringing? And that's not just in HR, it really is across the board. So it's going to be a really, really interesting time. I mean, it's not obviously related to my industry, but, you know, look at Hollywood and all the protests going on and the interesting
and things like that,
and you sort of think, well, you know, that's all a bit golden Hollywood. But actually, when you look at the bones of what they're arguing about, you think, it's something we are all going to have to start really considering. And I think it would be a bit naive to say that's not something that is coming faster than we'd even have predicted.
I think it has to. It's going to happen. But I've always thought, and I think it's data, right? It's going to, I think the roles will change in how you interpret data. Like you say, it's like, okay, so we can automate this, but there's still this piece left. And I think the trick will be is how people interpret whatever's left to a point. And there will still be that human connection. I hope that never goes away. Maybe it will to a point, but I'd like to think that there's still that human piece that is actually quite important. And again, that's still another form of communication, like a WhatsApp and everything else, that it's actually still okay to go, let's just go for a coffee and have a conversation that's actually physical rather than on a board, you know, or one-to-one over Teams, something like that. There's still got to be that community that you talked about.
Yeah, it does. I think everything comes back, and I feel like a broken record, but everything does come back to belonging, right? It's base psychology. And I think if you get to a point where you feel like you're working for a machine, you know, you're being measured by a machine, you're like, what about that? You know, it's all a bit Orwellian, isn't it? In terms of what about that feels, you know, on a human level, right? Exciting or interesting and even rewarding. So I think there is a lot that needs to be pulled apart, thought about. And I think, as I said, it's coming at quite a speed. So I think these discussions are only going to continue, but I'm excited for them too, because I think, like I said, there's the two sides of it. There's massive opportunity, but there's also, I think, massive responsibility to think about where technology can really serve us, but where it actually pushes things to, as you said, that non-human level, where actually then where does that kind of leave the world, not just HR?
You know what? And your son's into Marvel, so you'll appreciate it. It's almost like the Uncle Ben moment. With great power comes great responsibility.
It's true, though. It's true. It is. Like, that's a big topic in our house, anything Marvel. But I genuinely, I think it's been recognised by a lot of now, you know, world leaders, scientific leaders, and even those managing the technologies themselves, right? We don't know what we don't know here.
Yeah.
And there's so much, and there's so much impact, but the consequence, right, has to be really thought through. It's wonderful to unleash, right, ChatGPT on the world, but who's really monitoring the consequences? And how do we also, as businesses, even on a base level, because it's even on much more minute kind of interactions with technology, you know, obviously Teams, Zoom, they can all now transcript, right? Meeting notes. Where do they get saved? Where do they go? You know, this is your IP. This is really big stuff that actually, where are you putting in the world? And again, probably a bit outside of the HR spectrum, but I think they're all people-based decisions, right, that are being made.
They are, because it's true, because all of a sudden you might store it somewhere and you think it's completely safe, and it might not be a human that actually finds that anymore. And that's the bit, isn't it? And
they're using it for learning, and it will be regurgitated on platforms that you have no control of, sometimes not even access to.
You don't even know.
Where does that go? So it's, I think, a huge topic that I am absolutely not eloquent to speak on from an IT perspective, but I think from a very human perspective, there's an element of we have to be thinking about those capabilities, we have to be having those conversations, and I think actually it's also building people's capabilities to really understand and contribute in a powerful way. So that's a huge piece that we didn't need in maybe, even 5 years ago. I just don't think those conversations were happening. There were certain groups, obviously, who were well aware of what was coming, but I don't think it was in the mainstream.
It kind of hit me out of the blue, definitely. It was always robotics and Skynet, Terminator, this whole idea that the internet is going to just take over everything. But no one knew, like you say, no one knew 5 years ago what that really meant. But this kind of leads on to like a question I've kind of got, I suppose, within learning, because people have so much information at their fingertips. And I've definitely witnessed it. People are so quick now just to go, ChatGPT, what's the answer? Okay, gospel, done. I don't need to learn that now. How do you feel like learning is going to change? Like, is that going to be like a big part of this technical revolution? I suppose it might be because of what you just said, but where do you see that having a home within the next year?
Yeah, I think, look, the thing is that that's how we all learn right now. As much as I think in schools, obviously, they're all working on those base skills of really being curious and looking. Sadly, the minute we get like an iPhone or any kind of device in our hands, we also have like really quick access to Google for every question that we need in our day. If I need to figure out how to do, I don't know, like a school bake for Friday, I will go on YouTube and find myself something, a recipe to follow literally as I'm watching someone else do it if I need to. So I think the answer to that is that ship has sailed to a certain extent, that is now a behavior that is ingrained in all of us. I don't think that's a bad thing, though, because I think that there's a lot that you see that actually people can just pick up and do. You don't have to be a coder now to build a website.
No.
You don't have to be, an expert in DIY on a real base level to pick up a few tools and watch someone on YouTube do it. Like, it's genuinely, it puts a lot of power in people's fingertips. And I think that is exciting. What I think it doesn't do, which I think is more to your point, is it doesn't build that baseline of curiosity. It doesn't always build then the strength to kind of keep going, right, when things go wrong, or to figure out, well, what next? Because you always have that answer, right, straight back. This is how you do it. This is how. It's more about, well, actually, how do you have the fortitude, right, to carry on? How do you have that curiosity to think, but actually, how could this be better? Not just stop at, well, someone's told me this, and that was a really easy answer to find, so now I'm good. I think it's more about building that mindset of continuous growth. And we talk about that, I think, in learning quite a lot, but I genuinely believe in the power of that, and that from a human perspective as well as just company perspectives, if you've got people who can keep that drive, then you're in a much better position, because I think there is so much that is just so immediately answered that fundamentally you will never get to a point where you'll ask someone a question and they won't be able to find anything. They always will be able to find something, but you want actually everyone hopefully to just take that extra step to actually apply their own thinking and really, problem solve in a way that makes sense for them as well, not just because here's, the ABC that's been provided.
Do you think people in this kind of mindset that can't get the answers has encouraged a drop in resilience?
See, for me, resilience is a funny thing. So I know there's lots of studies on resilience, but I have quite a few conversations in my own team about this, because I don't love it as a term. I think when you actually look at what resilience means, it means that you just keep bouncing back. But actually, that's not human, right? To keep having to bounce back. If someone keeps, kind of pushing you down, like, why keep bouncing back up? Like, that's kind of resilience in a nutshell. And they've done, studies with groups in the army, and they've put them through resilience trainings, and it doesn't necessarily always reduce, or at least the traditional resilience thinking. I don't believe from the studies anyway that there's much empirical evidence that says that we can really shift resilience meaningfully through learning. I think what people need more of is that fortitude. So it's actually having some strength, right? So when things go wrong, you don't necessarily bounce back. It's not that resilience piece, but it's more about, well, you recraft, you reshape, you think, you move on.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that I do think, to actually answer your question properly rather than rant about resilience. But
good.
I do think that fortitude piece can be. But I think if you look at it, as I said, with a more of a growth mindset and you encourage people to be curious, you always push that little bit more, that you don't just accept the ChatGPT answer, right? That actually there's that, but what next? And how does that apply for this situation? How does that apply for the future? How does that, so that you're always kind of challenging people, because otherwise, what is the point of you versus a machine, right? And the point of view is that you're human, you're nuanced, and you bring something to the table in that perspective. And also just those insights, because you know what? I know ChatGPT actually was running a business, which is terrifying, but it's actually running a business.
Yeah.
So, there will be things that machine learning can do and will do, but I still believe that there's that brilliance of human nature to kind of push through and to find cracks of light. And I think, we should believe in our ability to do that and encourage that in people. Because I think if you sort of step back from that, it doesn't feel exciting, does it?
It's saying it would be a very dull world, I think.
Yeah.
If you weren't just left alone to be creative or figure something out. And it might be not the worst mistake, but it could be a mistake I learn and things you can do differently in the future. I like that a lot. I think that's definitely a brighter way to think about it, because you're probably right. With a resilience, I always think about it as you're always fighting a negative. You're always just kind of just trying to bounce back. I think you've said it absolutely the best way, but to think of it in a different way and actually go, okay, well, we find strength, let's find creativity, let's look at angles on this that is not just governed by a computer. It's got to be huge. I think the problem is nowadays, everyone knows this. Everyone knows, if you're inside a HR, whatever you're doing, everyone knows that this technology exists. And I'm guessing from a HR perspective, they must look at you and go, what are all the answers? And maybe not just you, but other HR professionals such as yourself. And has that affected the HR community in terms of burnout and stress and the expectation that is upon you? Because it seems to be like a big thing anyway. And we've seen it when we've tried to hire HR people. It's really difficult to find good ones, first of all, but secondly, ones that actually have all the answers the business want, but they don't actually know what they want, but they expect you to have the answers. Yeah,
I think you have to be comfortable enough in your own skin to sometimes recognize you don't know the answers. And I don't think, I guess here's a spoiler alert for the next 10 years. I don't think we'll have them then either. I think it's going to be continuous learning. And I think the secret is partnering with the business, because there is no one group that's going to have some magic answer that we can provide that gives us a dialogue that feels that it's going to be all encompassing. I think realistically, when we think about those technologies, it's partnering with IT, but it's also partnering with your business groups, right? Because it just goes, again, I don't think you could go to IT and expect them to have all the answers either here. No. This is a societal issue and it is a business-wide issue. There is nothing that we are going to be able to provide in HR that solves it. But yeah, I agree. People look to us and people look to us around, well, how are you going to policy that? How are you going to work with IT and come up with this solution for us? But I don't believe it's that simplistic. And no. I think actually anyone who approaches it that way is probably missing some great conversations actually around what their business will look like, how they want that to be interpreted, and how they don't want things to be in future. And for me, that would be the advice I guess I would give as an HR professional. But there's a lot in the same way when COVID hit. People sort of thought, well, HR may know what to do, so let's go there. And in reality, we were all learning together. And sometimes there is that pressure of we have to learn at a bit more pace. But that's a nice pressure to have, because you're doing it hopefully with the interests of how do we, again, keep that humanity in the team? How do we think about actually people within all these decisions rather than just what the opportunities are? How do we blend that with what's right for the people that are here and the people that we want to attract in future?
It's a journey.
It is a massive journey, and I have sadly no brilliant answers on that, but it's going to be a ride, I think.
I think so. What about benefits? Slight segue away from technology, because I think we could talk about that too long. So what about benefits? Because this has always been quite a big thing that people ask for. What are your benefits? What else do you offer? And I've always struggled with this, because I always think it must be really difficult to just reinvent the wheel. And that seems like what people expect, that you've got this amazing thing that is so revolutionary, so different. But in reality, is that necessary? Do you think that's going to change much next year? Or
I don't think it's going to change hugely next year. I think the secret is always look at your culture and go from there. I think people adding in benefits, like you said, that are just there to try and be revolutionary. If you're not doing anything else that feels very revolutionary, you know, if you're a company that doesn't even do hybrid working, but you're offering everyone, you know, gym membership 24/7, what difference, you know, do some of those things make? And not that I believe that's revolutionary either, by the way, but my point is, you know, where do you want to kind of spin the wheel on it? And for me, it's about, well, stay true to actually what your cultural values are as a business, know what they are first, and then figure out, well, how do your benefits speak to that? Because it's really hard, I think, to stand out in that regard. And also, is it actually what people are looking for on the other side? You know, are people looking for benefits that utterly stand out? You know, are they looking in your industry, right? And they might be. I think there's certain examples, like within the tech industry, of some really like creative benefits and different offers of, you know, literally go live on a houseboat for a month and they'll pay for it and you can log in from there. And that,
that's
you know,
cool.
that's cool stuff, right? There is really cool stuff that's there. But I think you also have to know your audience, right? I mean, we could do that and our scientists would be like, well, that's great, but I mean, I haven't got a lab. You know, it's
bring the lag with me and I'll go wherever you want.
Yeah, and equally, we have to think about, well, if we offered that to all of our non-lab team, and then that's not for the, what benefit is that really? So it looks fantastic on a website, I agree, but does it speak to us as a company? Are people? No. So I think there is that balance, but you do want to get a bit creative, right? You want to do things that push people a little bit, give them different experiences. I mean, we've been focusing a little bit more on experiential benefits. It's a little bit more linked to mental health and well-being, but we have a company called Pause in Work coming in with puppies later this week to our offices to give people, you know, 20 minutes of time just playing with puppies.
That's cool.
And actually genuinely taking a little bit of space, having a really happy break time and refocusing their day. You know, we know one of the key pieces of advice actually is get a dog, right? To actually really improve, you know, get outside, actually even being with animals, we know releases endorphins and actually has that, you know, lovely effect on us as humans. But actually not all of us can get dogs. Not all of us even live in, you know, spaces where that's feasible or frankly have the time necessarily to do all of that. So we are bringing the dogs to the office. So we have some beautiful little puppies coming in to give our team, again, a really different experience. So yes, you know, that is a little bit more of a different one. But my point is, think about the work that you're doing. That links really closely with our mental health and wellbeing support. So if you're doing those things, you know, build on them, but don't just kind of pick at random exciting initiatives and think, well, that will draw people in. Because I think if it just feels fundamentally misaligned, then it might be great for, you know, bringing one person in, but as a collective, will people really engage with it? Maybe not. And it is hard. And I think that there will be, on a more practical kind of level, more kind of just cashback benefits again, because inflation actually, I think, pay is just, as of today, now started to overtake inflation. But that is a unique circumstance in the last few years. So I think there still is a cost of living crisis. I think we still need to be really mindful of that. So you can be as experimental as you want with your benefits, but there is a fundamental reality that actually cash in this economy starts to mean a bit more for individuals. So I think, you know, just play with what you have a bit of fun with it. But I think there is some that you just need to be a bit mindful of who are you trying to attract here? And also, does it really gel with everything else you have going on?
I think that's brilliant, because just you actually, and it goes back to what I was saying about culture and whatnot. That's driven by the people directly, isn't it? You're thinking about what would benefit you guys and girls and everything in between, and that's where we'll go then. And if it is that, and it's not, okay, we'll get pizza and a PlayStation on a Thursday. Because that was the thing, wasn't it? I remember that being like the main kind of thing in an office environment, is that on Thursdays we get to chip off at 5 and we'll get a pizza in and we'll play PlayStation. And everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. Nowadays you're like, I don't even eat pizza, I'm gluten intolerant, I don't drink beer. You know? I can't play PlayStation, you know, it's
true, and it's not necessarily inclusive, right? No. And so I think, look, you have to recognize no benefit probably is ever going to be completely inclusive. But I think you have to kind of think about how you spend and just trying to balance. And it might be that you still do a pizza, right? For those who want to stay and socialize. Yeah. I don't think you have to like throw everything that was done before away. But I think it's just that balance of, but is that speaking to who we are as an organization? Does that actually provide the majority with the space? Or actually, would it be more beneficial to put that finance into doing maybe something once a month that feels a little bit bigger and that actually people can plan for, and that those then with kids and things don't feel like, well, I'm missing out every week because I can't do it, you know, that frequently, and I can't actually be engaged in that way. But there's other ways, right, to kind of get to the same piece. And again, that's a small, you know, social piece, but it's big in the context of actually how people engage.
That's great. So what other trends are you thinking are going to come next year? Is there anything else that you think that's on the horizon?
I think that there will just be more focus, if I'm honest, around that holistic package piece. So we've spoken about it in terms of the different elements, but I think it is about putting together who are your company and what does that mean. And I think people are now much more savvy at looking at beyond benefit statements, you know, beyond just what mental health resources do you have. I think they look more holistically at, well, what does that mean for things like flexible working? What does that mean for actually how you manage then your Christmas period even? You know, like, I think there are some conversations that happen that aren't just, I would say 10 years prior, it was all kind of like, well, what will my base pay be? Yep. What, you know, just more of the, you know, what was your bonus structure like? What was the payout rate like last year? It was all quite financially focused. And now I think generally with candidates, we have far more conversations around, well, what does flexibility look like at your workforce, you know, like workplace? What does the benefits package look like? And, you know, can I flex on that? What does, you know, holiday look like? Can I flex on that? So I think, again, we've had the whole flexible benefits rounds, right? That was a trend. I think it still is to a certain degree, but I don't think it's that. I think it's more that comprehensive picture of who you are as an organization. And I think people are less interested in just like the piecemeal kind of, oh, you offer this, so that's great, so now I'm really, really excited about you. Like, people are very much like looking at those individual elements and putting together, so this is what that means about your company, and this is actually what you stand for.
I think you're right.
And I think that hasn't been the case previously in my own experience. And I think that there is an element of also corporate social responsibility, sustainability that we haven't touched on. But that is massive. And I think that, again, depending on where organizations are in their life cycles, you're going to have some that are already doing amazing things there and some
not so much, or not
right?
at all.
And none of that's good or bad. It's just sometimes the shape of how they are. But I do think that there's an element of actually individuals expecting there to be company stances on certain topics. And that, again, 10 years ago, I don't think I've had one question about, you know, what's your company feeling on like Ukraine? Like no one would have expected a company to even make a statement on some of those, you know, genuinely worldwide issues. And now I think that there is much more where we're saying you bring your whole self to work, but then you have to know, well, what is my whole self entering into,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And what do the people around me think about that? And okay, there's always going to be diverse opinions and thoughts, right, on different political situations. But I think ultimately people are far more interested to know that my company stands for something good, that my company stands for individual human rights, that my company stands for how do we, really think about our footprint in the world, and that we're not creating, a problem for generations to come
on
to fix.
Yeah.
So that, I think, isn't new, but I think it's continuing to evolve. I think COVID shifted some of those conversations. I wouldn't say backwards, but I think it just didn't become as much of a topic as it was becoming. But, there's another rebuild, I think, going on there too.
I think you're right. The sustainability thing, I think, is growing exponentially because whether you like it or not, we're more aware of what we're doing to the planet. If you agree with climate change or not, you can't argue the fact that we're putting out more than what we're giving back, within the world, so to speak. And I've had it before where people come to me and say, roll's great, package is great, people are great, but what about this? And it would almost sound like obscure if it was 10 years ago. But I have had that where people have said, so what do they do in terms of the environment then? So how much, don't say so much about carbon and things like that, but how much waste does this company actually have in terms of paper, cardboard, day to day, water, energy? What are we doing about that? Yeah. You do get people that say that kind of thing now, and that was what make their decision ultimately. Because if we're all being competitive and we're trying to be creative with packages and the job's good, etc., it's almost like, yeah, but what else? And that's kind of where we're getting to, isn't it? Yeah. It's like, well, what else then?
But I think it's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you talk about bringing your whole self to work, if you talk about that, that being genuine, then those things have to align. You have to see the connections. You have to actually have that return of energy. And I think people are far more inclined, I think now, to decline roles or to just say, I wouldn't even consider it because, hey, I don't want to fund Jeff Bezos going up in a rocket.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
just not into that. And again, it's something I think to consider even when you think about putting benefits packages together and thinking about the companies that you're working with too. So I think that comes really heavily into my domain of, well, yeah, are we considering what impact we're doing, impact, and also will we in 10 years time be proud that we were connecting with certain companies?
Yeah.
And it is important, and not, again, probably just a primarily HR conversation, but I think particularly when you think about benefits, that's one that is quite top of mind, that you don't want to put something on there that's really off-putting for groups of individuals.
I'm quite excited to see the future though, like to think that we have it's all there. All the elements are all here, and some of it's very unexplored and innovative, and some of it's stuff we've got to work on. But I think as companies have evolved throughout the decades that we've both kind of been working, but more recently, the pace of things has changed dramatically, I always feel. But I think we've found a bit more of a balance, even in the past 2 or 3 years, from going back-to-back meetings to just doing what you need to do, always have this kind of feeling that I just have to kind of get on, to actually thinking about better boundaries, kind of purpose-led kind of ways of working, and then looking at benefits that we discussed and well-being and how it all comes together. Because ultimately, there's lots of studies to say that if you get these pieces right, your performance, your output, your revenue, and all the rest of it will actually increase exponentially because you're looking after what's actually the things that are put into it. And I think that's kind of where companies need to get what they need to get right. Think about each one of those individuals. They're all inputting something, and if they feel like they've got the right environment, the right guidance, the right technology, the right culture, they'll ultimately output exactly what you want, and probably do it way better and be way more creative because you gave them that environment to kind of start from. I mean, that's the euphoria, right? That's the kind of...
Yeah, but if you go back and, like you said, you tear up all the things that you used to know about work, and like you really created that.
Yeah.
Like, we do have an opportunity to do that. No one's telling us, like, no, a
they're
workplace must be this. So I think actually COVID helped shift it somewhat, but I feel like actually everyone's kind of leaning in and thinking, well, yeah, how do we make these things happen? But also, how do we also provide, as you said, somewhere where people feel that they can do that as a collective, and actually then that impact is really just absolutely amplified in the world.
Yeah.
And, we all want, I think, to have some meaning in what we're doing. I don't think anyone shows up, purely just because they absolutely have to. It's rare that I believe that in any of the teams I've worked in. So I feel like actually, if you can really harness that in a way that works for individuals and doesn't compress them or give them, boundaries that don't need to be there just for the sake of, because this is what we do, actually it's massively exciting, right? To think about, where does that go?
Yeah. So you're right. I don't think I've met very few people in my life where I kind of think you're out there just to be frustrating, just to be annoying, just to not turn up. I don't think they exist en masse at all.
No.
They really don't.
I think I couldn't do my job, right? If I didn't believe that everything starts with good intent, you wouldn't work, right?
No,
in HR at all.
You could definitely get an easier job, probably.
I think from a human perspective, I believe that there is genuinely that piece in us all that wants to have that meaning, that wants to have actually, why am I here, answered. And the more we can do that for people, well, it's great if you can have that absolute perfect fit of someone feeling they've got that purpose, and that also the workspace and place that they're in hasn't just stuck in some arbitrary rules, has really thought about, well, what could we look like? How could we support that? Not always going to get it right.
No.
There's going to be a million times that, it won't fit every individual absolutely perfectly. But I think if you can at least come with that approach, then things do look hugely different.
Yeah, definitely. Exciting times ahead. I think we've covered most aspects. I don't think we've missed anything, have we?
I don't think so. I think that was quite far-reaching.
It was far-reaching. It was brilliant. I think it is. It's just an exciting time. It's definitely going to be an evolution again. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
It really was. I don't think there's much more to say. We don't know what the episodes are going to be next, do we, or anything. This really is the first one. So, well, we'll sign off to saying thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for yours.
So in the event that people would like to reach out to you, how would they go about that?
They could ping me on LinkedIn. I cannot promise a daily response on LinkedIn, but I will check and will 100% be looking for those messages. Amazing.
Well, thank you so much for everyone listening today. It was definitely a great conversation, and we'll definitely have more like it to come. Thanks very much.